She was forced out of her daughter's baptism by her ex's family, until a millionaire stood up and called her family his own. "You do not belong here. Leave. Now." The voice echoed through the ornate hall of the church, slicing through the soft murmurs of the gathered guests. Rebecca froze halfway down the aisle, her hands clutching a small yellow wrapped box against her chest. She had tried to enter quietly, unnoticed, simply to glimpse her daughter on her baptism day. But Eleanor had seen her the moment she crossed the threshold. Eleanor Matthews, her former mother-in-law, stood from the second pew, her expression sharp as shattered glass. Her expensive jewelry sparkled under the soft lights as she marched down the aisle, heels clacking with fury. Her voice rose again, louder this time. "You lost your right to be here the day you lost custody. This is a sacred day for our family, not for discarded mistakes like you." Rebecca's cheeks flushed. She stood frozen near the back of the church, surrounded by staring eyes. Some watched with discomfort, others with thinly veiled curiosity. A few guests turned their heads, clearly not wanting to be seen witnessing the scene. No one moved to intervene. She saw him, Mark, standing beside his new wife near the front. He was dressed sharply in a navy suit, his hair slicked back, his expression blank. He did not say a word. He did not look at her. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Rebecca said, her voice shaking but soft. "I only wanted to see Lucy. Just to be here." Eleanor's face twisted. "You were told not to come. You are no longer part of this child's life. You have no place here." Rebecca glanced at the altar. Lucy stood in her christening gown, tiny hands curled around a stuffed lamb. She was giggling, her little cheeks round and rosy. She did not see her mother. She had not seen her in over a year. "I brought her something," Rebecca whispered. "Just a small gift. That's all." I said, "Leave." Eleanor barked, "Or I will have you removed." Before Rebecca could speak again, a man in a security uniform stepped forward from the side aisle. His expression was apologetic but firm. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me." "No, please, I'll leave after the ceremony," Rebecca pleaded, stepping back, still holding the gift tightly. "I'm sorry," he said, reaching for her arm. "Don't touch me," she said, panic blooming in her chest. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. I just want to be here." The guard hesitated, but then Eleanor hissed now. He took Rebecca gently but firmly by the arm and turned her toward the doors. As they reached the back of the church, Rebecca stumbled. The small box fell from her hands. She bent quickly to retrieve it, but in that moment Eleanor stormed forward. "Enough," she said coldly. She stepped forward and, with the heel of her designer shoe, crushed the box on the stone floor. A sharp crack echoed in the hush of the church. The yellow paper tore, revealing a small hand-carved wooden rattle with Lucy's name burned into the handle. Splinters scattered. The silence deepened. Gasps escaped from a few onlookers, but no one spoke. Eleanor looked down at Rebecca. "This trash is exactly like you, cheap, broken, and unwelcome." Rebecca stared at the ruined gift. Her breath caught. Her knees felt weak. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The security guard pulled her gently again. Rebecca let herself be led to the heavy double doors, her vision blurred. The sound of Lucy laughing floated behind her, innocent and unaware. The doors creaked open. The sun outside was far too bright. Wind caught her blonde hair and tugged at the hem of her dress as she stepped out onto the stone steps. The guard released her arm and returned inside without a word. Rebecca stood there alone, shoulders hunched, eyes on the cracked remains of the rattle now lying just inside the church doors. Behind her, the doors slammed shut. And still no one had stood up for her. Not Mark. Not the priest. Not a single soul. Rebecca sat slowly on the cold stone step, drawing her knees up. The wind chilled her arms, but she did not move. She picked up a sliver of the wooden toy that had once been whole and ran her fingers over Lucy's name, burned into the wood, just like her memory was burned into Rebecca's heart. She had not come to fight. She had not come to reclaim anything. She had come to offer love. Just one moment, just one gift, just to be near her child on this sacred day. And they had cast her out like she was filth. Tears did not fall. Not yet. Because something else began to rise in her chest, not despair, not shame, but something fierce and trembling. The first flicker of defiance. And then, just as she leaned forward to collect the last of the gift's remains, a shadow fell across the step. A polished black shoe came into view. Then another. A voice, calm but commanding, spoke behind her. That was a cruel thing to do. Rebecca turned slowly. And for the first time, she saw him. That was a cruel thing to do. The voice was calm, but it carried weight. Rebecca turned toward the sound, blinking against the sunlight. A man stood before her, tall, well-dressed, perhaps in his mid-50s. His black suit fit him perfectly. His shoes gleamed. His salt and pepper hair was swept neatly back, his presence both composed and commanding. But it was his eyes, gray, steady, and filled with something deeper than pity, that held her in place. He walked past her slowly and stepped into the open church doorway. With deliberate care, he knelt down and picked up the crushed wooden rattle. The pieces were splintered, but he gathered them gently, brushing off the dust with a clean handkerchief as if they were precious. He turned to face Eleanor, still standing just inside the doors, her mouth half open, her chin raised. He held up the broken toy and said evenly, "You did not step on this because it was worthless. You stepped on it because your heart is." Gasps whispered through the doorway. Some of the guests had risen from their seats to see what was happening. The organist had stopped playing. The silence inside the church was heavy and still. Eleanor's face turned crimson. "Who are you?" she snapped. The man stepped forward, standing tall, his voice steady. "My name is Charles Whitaker. I'm a businessman. Some call me a philanthropist, but none of that matters today. Today, I am a man who cannot stand by and watch cruelty be mistaken for dignity." He turned his gaze to Rebecca. She was still seated on the stone step, one hand on her lap, the other gripping a shard of the broken rattle. "May I help you up?" he asked gently. Rebecca hesitated, unsure what to make of this man who had appeared like a storm breaking over dry land. She slowly reached out, and he took her hand without hesitation. His grip was warm and strong as he helped her to her feet. "Thank you," she said softly, barely above a whisper. He nodded once, then turned back to the church and addressed the crowd now gathering at the doorway. His voice did not rise in volume, yet it carried with absolute clarity. "This woman," he said, gesturing to Rebecca, "once saved me. 10 years ago I had nothing, no home, no food, no hope. I was invisible to the world. But she saw me. She gave me a hot meal, her only dinner, and a note that said, 'Wishing you a warmer tomorrow.' I carried that note in my pocket through every cold night that followed. Murmurs began to ripple through the pews. She gave me kindness when I had no name, no title. She didn't do it for recognition. She did it because she believed I mattered." He looked again at Eleanor, his voice sharper now. "And you? What have you done? You stepped on her gift to her daughter. You humiliated her on sacred ground. You preach family while practicing exclusion." Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came. Charles stepped aside and turned to Rebecca once more. "You deserve to be inside. You deserve to see your child." He offered her his arm. Rebecca blinked back tears. This time they came not from humiliation, but from something she had not felt in a long, long time. Dignity. She slipped her arm through his. Together they walked back into the church. Every step down the aisle was quiet. The congregation parted slowly. Mark turned toward them, stunned. His new wife whispered something, but he did not respond. At the front, Lucy looked up. Her eyes sparkled. A bright smile spread across her little face as she pointed and called out, "Mommy." Rebecca's breath hitched, her feet forward, but Charles's hand gently pressed against hers, steadying her. Lucy laughed and waved. Rebecca waved back, tears spilling down her cheeks. At the altar, the priest stood in stunned silence. Charles turned to him and said, "Please continue." The priest hesitated, glanced at Eleanor, then nodded. He adjusted his stole and resumed the ceremony. Rebecca sat beside Charles near the front. Her hands trembled, still holding the broken pieces of her gift. But inside her chest, something had shifted. She was no longer the discarded ex-wife. She was a mother. And someone had finally stood up and called her family. The sun was setting as Charles drove them through the quiet neighborhood. The sky was painted in soft orange and lavender, casting a gentle glow over the treetops. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, silent, still clutching the broken pieces of the rattle in her lap. Charles glanced at her once, not pressing her to speak. The silence between them was not awkward. It was careful, tender, the way two people navigate the edges of deep wounds. They pulled up to a modest brick building nestled between blooming cherry trees. The walkway was lined with small lanterns, and a wooden sign near the entrance read, "Whitaker Commons." Charles parked and opened the door for her. "This is one of the properties I own, a place for people who need a safe restart." Rebecca hesitated. "I'm not sure I should. "I want you to rest," he said gently. "Just tonight. No obligations. Just a warm place." She nodded quietly and followed him up the stairs. The apartment was small but cozy. Soft curtains fluttered in the open window, and a warm scent of lavender lingered in the air. A small kitchen opened into a living room with a couch, a bookshelf, and a vase of fresh daisies on the table. Rebecca stood in the doorway, taking it all in. "You don't even know me," she said softly. Charles walked into the kitchen and set a kettle on the stove. "I know you," he said without looking back. "Better than you think." She sat at the small table. 10 years ago, I worked at a cafe. That's where I saw you, isn't it?" He nodded, pouring hot water into 2 mugs. "You didn't hesitate. You gave me your food, your kindness. You looked me in the eye. No one else had done that in months." Rebecca folded her hands. "I was just trying to be kind." "And you were," he said, handing her a cup of tea. But to someone who had been invisible for so long, it meant more. She sipped the tea, feeling the warmth spread through her. Then, slowly, she began to talk. She told him about Mark, how he used to be charming and gentle, how he pursued her even when she hesitated, how he promised her the world. She told him about the wedding that felt like a compromise, the disapproving looks from his family, the comments about her background, the way Eleanor never said her name with kindness. She described how, after Lucy was born, things changed. Mark withdrew. Eleanor stepped in. Then came the court case, cold, brutal, rigged. "They painted me as unstable," she said, her voice cracking. "They said I was emotional, too poor, too inexperienced. They had experts, lawyers, influence. I had nothing." "But you had love," Charles said. She nodded, eyes glassy. "And I lost her anyway." Charles stood, walked to the side table, and opened a small drawer. From it he pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn and yellowed with time. He placed it on the table in front of her. Rebecca stared. Her handwriting, faded but unmistakable. "Wishing you a warmer tomorrow." Her breath caught in her throat. "You kept it?" she whispered. "I carried it for years," he said. "It was the only thing I had that reminded me I was still human." She reached out and touched the paper with trembling fingers. "I looked for you," Charles said quietly. "For 10 years. I searched cafes, shelters, churches. I never knew your name. Just your face. Just this note. Today, when I saw you at that church, I knew." Rebecca looked up at him. Tears were falling now, quiet and unashamed. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said. Charles's voice deepened, thick with emotion. "You treated me like a person when no one else would. You gave without expecting. You saw me when I had nothing." He stepped closer, his voice steady but tender. "You gave me life. Today I gave back just a piece of it." Rebecca wiped her cheek with her sleeve. "Why would you go so far?" He met her eyes. "Because I made a vow that if I ever found the person who believed in me when no one else did, I would make sure they never felt invisible again." A long silence passed between them. Then he said, softly, "You saw me as human. I want to see you now as family." Rebecca's breath caught again. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Charles replied. "Just know you are not alone anymore." And in that small, warm apartment, something long frozen inside her finally began to thaw. Rebecca awoke to the scent of fresh coffee. The apartment was quiet, sunbeams filtering softly through the curtains. She sat up slowly and found a small folded note resting beside the mug on the nightstand. "Today, remember you are a wonderful mother." It was written in neat, slanted handwriting. Charles's handwriting. Rebecca smiled despite herself. It had only been a week since she'd first stepped into this apartment, since that awful morning at the church. And yet, something in her world had already begun to shift. When she stepped into the kitchen, the room was clean, warm, welcoming. A vase of daisies sat near the window. Her favorite tea was now tucked into the cabinet. The silence was no longer cold, it was calm. Charles wasn't around, but that didn't surprise her. He never hovered, never demanded attention or credit. He simply showed up in quiet ways. Later that day, while tidying the spare room, Rebecca found something that took her breath away. The room had been rearranged. A small twin bed now stood in the corner, neatly made with soft floral sheets. A handmade quilt was folded at the end. On the desk sat a drawing pad and a little box of colored pencils. A nightlight shaped like a moon glowed faintly next to a stuffed lamb. Rebecca stood in the doorway, her hand on her mouth. Charles had turned the guest room into a space for Lucy. No one had asked him to. No one had even suggested it. And yet, he had prepared the space with quiet care, as if her daughter's presence here wasn't just a possibility, but a certainty. When he returned that evening, Rebecca found him in the living room with his sleeves rolled up, a book open on his lap. "Did you do the room?" she asked gently. He looked up and smiled. "I thought she might want her own space when she visits." Rebecca stepped closer. "Thank you. It's beautiful." He shrugged modestly. "I just want her to feel safe here. Like it's hers, too." Later that week, Charles came home with 2 more books tucked under his arm. He placed them on the kitchen counter. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "Parenting guides," he said. "From the library. I asked the librarian for books that help parents reconnect with their children." Rebecca laughed softly, touched beyond words. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." He said it simply, without flourish, without expectation. Every morning after that, she would find a new note next to her coffee. "You're doing better than you think. Lucy is lucky to have a mom like you. Today is yours. Take it gently." Rebecca began to look forward to them, those tiny affirmations that reminded her she wasn't invisible anymore, that someone saw her, that someone believed in her. One night, she returned late from a meeting with the lawyer. She found Charles in the kitchen, stirring soup on the stove. "I thought you might be too tired to cook," he said. They sat at the small kitchen table, the warm food a balm after a long day. Rebecca told him about the lawyer, the case being reopened, the court hearing scheduled. "You don't have to carry this all alone anymore," Charles said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why do you care so much?" He met her eyes. "Because I know what it's like to be dismissed, to feel powerless. And because I see who you really are." She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "And who am I?" He reached across the table and gently touched her hand. A mother, a survivor, a woman worth standing beside. There was no dramatic confession, no sweeping gesture, just that quiet warmth, that steady presence, that way he had of showing love without saying the word. And that, somehow, meant more than anything else. Rebecca went to sleep that night holding his note to her chest. "Tomorrow is waiting. And you're strong enough to meet it." Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, her hands curled around a mug of tea Charles had made. Morning light spilled through the window, but the warmth felt distant. Charles entered the room holding a thick manila folder. He set it down in front of her. "I need you to see this," he said gently. "What is it?" she asked, her voice tight. He opened the folder, spreading out papers, emails, ledgers, medical transcripts. "My lawyer found the psychiatric report they used to take Lucy from you," he explained. "It said you were unstable, but it was a lie. The doctor who wrote it was paid off by your ex-father-in-law's shell company." Rebecca stared, her breath caught in her chest. "They bought the diagnosis?" she whispered. Charles nodded. "They stole your daughter, Rebecca, but now we bring the truth to court." Charles's attorney, Claire Turner, filed a motion to reopen the custody case. She brought in a new psychologist who interviewed Rebecca extensively. The results were clear. Rebecca was stable, nurturing, and deeply committed to her child. 1 week later, Rebecca walked into the courthouse with Charles beside her. This time she was no longer trembling. She was ready. Inside the courtroom, Mark sat with Eleanor and his attorney. He avoided Rebecca's gaze. Eleanor's expression was a mask of cold confidence. Claire rose first. "Your Honor, we have uncovered compelling evidence of fraud. The psychiatric evaluation used in the original custody ruling was falsified and influenced by bribery." She laid out the trail of bank transfers, the corrupt diagnosis, and the deliberate effort to paint Rebecca as unfit. The new psychologist testified Miss Carter is emotionally healthy and a capable mother. The trauma of separation only shows her resilience. Claire closed with a simple plea. "We request immediate visitation rights and a full custody review." The judge looked to Rebecca. "Do you wish to speak?" Rebecca stood. Her voice did not shake. She turned to Mark. "You promised to protect me. Instead, you let your family destroy me. You watched them take Lucy, and you said nothing." Then she turned to the judge. "I am not perfect, but I am a mother, and no amount of wealth should have silenced that truth. I love my daughter, and I will never stop fighting for her." The courtroom fell silent. Finally, the judge spoke. "This court acknowledges the fraudulent nature of the original proceedings. Miss Carter is granted immediate supervised visitation. A custody review will be scheduled. Justice must not be bought. Eleanor gasped. Mark sat motionless. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, not from pain, but from vindication. Outside, on the courthouse steps, reporters shouted questions. Chimeras flashed. But Rebecca focused only on Charles. "You gave me the strength," she said. "You always had it," he replied. "You just needed someone to remind you." He placed a hand on her back, grounding her. Rebecca tilted her face toward the sunset sky, and for the first time in years, she smiled, not from hope alone, but from the power of finally being heard. The little park near Whitaker Commons was filled with laughter, streamers, and balloons. A banner hung between two trees read in bold, cheerful letters, "Lucy's first birthday with Mom." Tables overflowed with cupcakes, finger foods, and lemonade. A colorful piñata dangled from a tree branch, and a dozen children played tag under the bright June sun. Parents stood nearby, chatting and smiling. Local musicians strummed light tunes under a gazebo. A news van was parked discreetly near the entrance. Charles had thought of everything. Rebecca stood near the center of it all, her blonde hair curled loosely around her shoulders, her pale yellow dress swaying gently in the breeze. She watched Lucy run barefoot in the grass, her dress stained with frosting and joy, and could hardly believe this moment was real. "This is all for her?" She had whispered to Charles when he first showed her the invitation. "For her," he said, "and for you. The world needs to see what love looks like." And the world did. News outlets picked up the story, single mother reunites with daughter after custody injustice. Charles had invited the local press not for spectacle, but to shift the narrative, to show that Rebecca was no longer hidden, shamed, or voiceless. She was here, she was present, she was mother. Charles stood beside her now, wearing a light blazer and an easy smile, watching Lucy smash cake into another child's hand. "She's quite the artist," he joked. Rebecca laughed, a sound lighter than air. "I forgot what this felt like, to laugh without guilt." He looked at her, something soft behind his eyes. "You deserve every second of this." As the sun began to dip, Rebecca stepped onto a small platform near the food table. A hush fell over the gathering. Children quieted. Parents turned. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice steady. "Not just to Charles, who gave us this day, but to all of you, for showing up, for believing that every mother deserves to be part of her child's life." There was a small cheer, scattered applause. Before she could step down, a movement near the park's gate caught her eye. Eleanor and Mark. They stood just beyond the fence, stiff and awkward in the fading light. Mark held a small gift bag. Eleanor's eyes were heavy with something unfamiliar remorse. They stepped forward together. The crowd watched in silence as they approached the platform. Mark spoke first, his voice low but clear. "Rebecca, we came to say something we should have said a long time ago." Eleanor nodded, her usual coldness stripped away. "We were wrong," she said simply. "I was wrong." Rebecca studied them for a moment. The crowd waited. A breeze passed through the trees, rustling the leaves above. She stepped down and faced them. "I never thought I'd hear that," she said. Mark lowered his gaze. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I do want Lucy to know the truth one day, that her mother never gave up on her." Eleanor's voice cracked. "I hope someday you'll let us make amends." Rebecca stood quietly. Then she spoke, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with grace. "I forgive you," she said, "but I won't forget." There was no anger in her tone, only clarity. "Because it was through that pain that I found something I never had before. I found people who love without conditions, who stand by me not because they have to, but because they choose to. That's family." Eleanor's eyes brimmed with tears. She nodded slowly and stepped back. Rebecca turned, walked back to the heart of the celebration, and lifted Lucy into her arms. The little girl squealed, frosting smeared across her chin. Charles approached, offering Rebecca a napkin. She took it with a smile, wiping Lucy's cheeks, then planting a kiss on her forehead. The music resumed. Laughter rose again. The sun cast golden streaks across the sky. And in the middle of it all, Rebecca stood, no longer broken, no longer forgotten, but whole. With Lucy on her hip and Charles at her side, she was surrounded not by the family that had cast her out, but by the one she had built. And for the first time she celebrated not just her daughter's Otter's life, but her own. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon drifted through the bakery on the corner of Willow and Main. The freshly painted sign above the door read, "Rebecca's Hearth." Inside, croissants, lemon bars, and cookies lined the display case. But the heart of the place was in the back room, where laughter rang off the tiled walls. Rebecca stood at the long wooden counter, her apron dusted in flour, guiding a group of children, most from the local shelter, as they braided challah dough. For many, it was their first time baking, being trusted with something delicate. Here they were safe. Charles had purchased the building, but it was Rebecca's dream that gave it soul. She offered free weekend baking classes for low-income children, calling the program Sweet Starts. Lucy helped each Saturday, passing out aprons and washing bowls, always by her mother's side. Though Lucy now split time between homes, she always chose Rebecca when given the option. The bond between mother and daughter was unshakable, evident in every hug and early morning giggle over warm muffins. Charles was always nearby, quiet and consistent. He repaired shelves, stocked flour, and read at the same corner table each morning with a coffee in hand. He never asked for anything. One winter evening, after the bakery had closed, Rebecca stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the bowls. String lights glowed overhead, casting a soft golden hue. Snow drifted past the windows. Charles sat at the table, reading, the room filled with peaceful silence. "I never imagined this," Rebecca said, drying her hands and leaning against the counter. "I thought everything was over." Charles looked up with a slow smile. "You didn't lose your life. You just lost the people who couldn't see your worth." She walked over and sat beside him. "You gave me more than shelter," she said. "You helped me remember who I was." He set the book aside. "Do you remember what you asked me that night outside the church?" She nodded. "I asked why you helped me. I said I owed you," he said quietly. "But it was more than that." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, creased piece of paper. "Wishing you a warmer tomorrow. This saved my life," he said. "But what stayed with me wasn't the food. It was the way you saw me. Like I mattered." Rebecca's breath caught. Charles looked down. "To me, family isn't blood. It's not obligation. It's the people who choose to stay." She reached out, gently placing her hand over his. "I choose to stay," she whispered. "If you'll have me." He looked up, eyes bright with emotion. "I always wanted you to." She stood and stepped into his arms, not from gratitude, but from certainty. In the quiet of the bakery, beneath soft lights and the scent of sugar and spice, love, unspoken but unmistakable, settled gently between them. Outside, snow blanketed the street in silence. Inside, three souls, mother, daughter, and the man once saved by a muffin, were building something lasting. They were building a home. Spring arrived like a soft sigh over the town. Cherry blossoms drifted through the air, carried by the breeze, their petals dancing over sidewalks and catching in Lucy's golden curls. The little girl ran ahead on the park path, clutching a small paper bag filled with warm pastries from the bakery. Her laughter echoed like birdsong. Behind her, Rebecca and Charles walked hand in hand. The afternoon sun bathed them in golden light, their steps unhurried, their silence content. Charles wore his usual soft sweater and a light jacket. Rebecca had her arm looped through his, her pale blue dress swaying gently with each step. Their fingers interlaced like threads woven over time, strong and natural. As they approached a wooden bench near the pond, Lucy plopped down on the grass, unwrapping a cookie with exaggerated care. Rebecca and Charles took the bench, watching her with quiet smiles. "It feels like a dream sometimes," Rebecca murmured. Charles turned to her, his eyes kind. "I used to sit here alone," she continued, voice low. "Back when I couldn't see Lucy. I'd watch other families walk by and wonder if I'd ever belong anywhere again." Charles said nothing, only squeezed her hand. She looked out at the pond, where ducks glided across still water. The trees swayed gently overhead. "The day they dragged me from that church," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I thought I had lost everything. My dignity, my child, my reason to keep trying." She turned to him now, her eyes soft but certain. "But then, I found something more." Charles watched her, his expression open. "I found a man who didn't owe me anything, but gave me everything. A man who didn't ask me to be anyone other than who I was, who saw me when I felt invisible." He looked down, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. Rebecca reached over and rested her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I'd know love again. Not like this. Not quiet and steady, not built from flour and kindness." He let out a gentle chuckle, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Lucy ran over then, crumbs on her chin, and climbed onto Rebecca's lap without hesitation. "I saved the last cookie for you," she said, handing her mother the treat, proud and sticky-fingered. Rebecca accepted it with a laugh, planting a kiss on Lucy's forehead. Charles leaned in and kissed the top of Lucy's head too. She beamed and leaned back against both of them. A breeze rustled the trees above, showering them with soft petals. They sat there in silence, mother, daughter, and the man who had once lived on the streets, now holding their world together with kindness and quiet strength. As the sun began to dip, casting long golden shadows over the park, Lucy jumped to her feet. "Let's walk home," she chirped. Rebecca stood, taking Charles's hand. Lucy took the other. Together they walked down the winding path, their shadows stretching ahead, hand in hand, hearts in sync. They did not look like a traditional family. They were something better. A family not born of obligation or name, but chosen piece by piece from love, courage, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves a second chance. The sun sank lower behind the trees, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. And in that soft, falling light, three silhouettes moved forward, together. As a real family, one built not by blood but by kindness and choice. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose, built not by blood, but by compassion, second chances, and the quiet courage to love again. Rebecca, Charles, and Lucy remind us that no matter how broken the path, healing is possible. Love can rise from loss, and kindness can change everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every week we bring you true tales of hope, redemption, and the resilience of the human spirit. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to believe in love again. Thank you for watching.